My father warned me before my wedding that he believed my fiancé would cheat on me if presented with an opportunity. I hated that he told me this. I never had a good relationship with my father, and I believed he was jealous that my fiancé was prettier than my mom and really in love with me. I didn't plan on having a close relationship with him during my married life. My mom was different, I could tell her anything, and she was really supportive. I almost felt bad she was still married to my asshole of a father. I went through with the marriage because my woman never gave me something to worry about. We were married for 7 years, living an hour and a half away from my parents, that entire time before more than one marriage came to an abrupt end. My wife had a job 30 minutes away in the direction of my parents' house. She started to become condescending and rude to me in February of that year. Eventually, I felt like the less I said, the better, so we just started watching movies or shows together when she was home from work. I worked from home writing and recording music. There. When I first started getting gigs, my wife was really supportive and came to my shows. After a few years, she got bored with it. I think she wished for me to become rich and famous. My wife continued disrespecting me and getting snappy until she told me she needed to start working late sometimes. I didn't believe that was the case. I waited in my car in her work parking lot. When she left at the usual time, she drove the opposite direction of work. I followed her all the way to my parents' house. I turned off my car lights way down the road and just inched closer along the curb. I saw my dad get in the car with her before she drove away. Was all I could think as I followed them at a long distance. I called my mom as I drove. She was out to dinner with a group of old friends. She asked me if anything was wrong and if she needed to come home, and I told her no. I said she could call me tomorrow. I didn't want to tell her what was happening. They pulled into a shopping center suddenly, and I think it was because they suspected they were being followed. I continued on, pulling into a neighborhood shortly ahead. I could see through the trees the moment my wife's car pulled out. They literally drove down the street to a hotel. I parked my car next to hers. This couldn't be happening. Did she drive my dad to a hotel? How was I supposed to get through something like this? How was my mom supposed to get through this? It was so unfair. After this, I was going to move out of state. My wife and father came out of the hotel an hour later. I was waiting by my wife's car and she freaked out when she saw me. My dad had a strange demeanor. I then decided to walk up to him and punched him in the face. He fell down and a hotel employee saw this. They called the police. My wife was already crying. She couldn't believe I was there. I think because I was there, she was more abruptly hit with the reality of what she'd done. She cried really hard, telling me she was sorry repeatedly. I screamed some choice words at her while my dad got to his feet. I told him he was a horrible father and the only reason my wife slept with him was that he convinced her to. I told him he was dead to me. I looked at my wife and called her a worthless harlot. I told her I would never see her again after our divorce was final. She reached out for me with tears streaming down her face like she needed a forgiving embrace. I pushed her away and she started crying even more. I got in my car to leave, but the police showed up. I told them everything that happened and my dad, surprisingly, didn't press charges against me for punching him. My wife apparently felt some remorse because she refused to give my dad a ride home. The police had to. I found out the next morning that he told my mom he was mugged while on a walk. I ignored all the calls and texts from my wife. She apparently slept in the hotel parking lot in her car since I told her she wasn't welcome in my house anymore. My mom called me the next morning, which is when she told me about the mugging. As hard as it was, I told her what happened the night before. At first, she didn't believe me, but then it made more sense to her and she knew I wouldn't lie about this. She wasn't as upset as I thought. She was more apologetic to me because it was my wife. She said she hadn't been very happy in the relationship for a while now, and this was a good time to end it. I was relieved we could support each other through the divorce process. My mom moved in with me, and my wife moved in with my dad. She only stayed there for 1 week though. My dad said she wasn't worth keeping around. Due to the infidelity and the police report that recorded the 3 of us at the hotel, my mom and I each got to keep our houses. My dad moved into a motel. My mom's house was built in such a way that it could easily be transformed into two independent living spaces. I used the money from selling my house to remodel my mom's house so I could live with her. She loved this idea. We each had our own front door, but we lived in the same place. We kept each other company and gave each other support. My wife moved out of state instead of me. She apparently had a distant cousin to live with in Philadelphia. My ex tried apologizing and asking me if we could move on from it, even after the divorce. She had a hard time accepting we were over, and she told me she missed me every day. I'm sorry, but cheating on me with my father is unforgivable. She didn't deserve to have anyone trust her again. As soon as she got a new boyfriend, I took the liberty of sharing with him through social media what my ex did to me. At first he didn't believe me, but he broke up with her a month later. My ex called me crying and yelling at me. I told her I didn't do anything wrong. If anything, I spared him heartbreak. She said she wouldn't do that ever again, and I asked her what made her do it to me. She said she didn't know, but my dad talked to her about how I never grew up to be a man and she could be loved better. I haven't spoken to my dad since that day. I don't know where he is or what happened to him. My mom hasn't spoken to him either, but we're there for each other. We each found a new person to start dating, so that's cool. I don't respond or answer calls from my ex anymore, and I won't barge into her dating life again. I realized I have to move on, and if I'm speaking with every new partner she has, I'm not moving on very well. I've actually gotten more gigs and income from my music since this happened. It's the thing I enjoy the most in life, and the fact that I can pursue this dream makes me a very happy man. Wow, OP, I am so sorry your father treated you this way. It's incredibly wrong and inappropriate of him. I'm glad you and your mom cut him out of your lives. It's amazing you both had each other for support, but so disappointing that this even happened. I'm relieved no charges were pressed against you in the heat of the moment, discovering your wife cheated on you. You made the right decision to immediately separate from your wife and file for divorce. I don't think anyone could completely forgive or move past this level of betrayal. Your wife had already started to see you in a bad light. She should have been mature enough to know how she felt about you independently of how your father felt about you. I believe you will find a woman who's mature enough to know that trust and communication are needed if a relationship is meant to last. A successful relationship needs two selfless and considerate people who don't let their egos get out of hand. Thank you for sharing your story. Now let's get into today's second story. My wife, 25, took up a part-time job with Uber Eats to help earn us some extra money. I, 29, just started a good job, but I wouldn't be paid very much until my first raise after the training period. My wife was out driving around a lot, and she had this one male friend that she talked to all the time. They'd been friends since they were 12, so when we got married I didn't feel like I had a right to end the friendship. It had only ever been a friendship all the way to this point, so I didn't feel very worried about it. I knew her Facebook password, which was the only platform she used to message or call anyone, but I never logged into it until one particular day. On this day I was at work and she was Uber eating. Suddenly, for no reason at all, my brain told me to log into my wife's Facebook. I was pretty weirded out by it and hesitated. The longer I waited the worse I felt, so I did it and I was shocked. She was live messaging the friend I mentioned and they were making arrangements for her to come over again. He mentioned that it was really convenient she was doing a delivery job and had a reason to be out. She said it was the perfect opportunity for them to have plate dates all the time. I can't tell you how much panic I felt in my chest. I just happened to log into her Facebook at work and read this. I called my coworker over. We were pretty good friends and told him what was going on. He asked if their messages had an address in them, and they did, from 4 months ago. I was on the verge of throwing up. I couldn't imagine my wife going behind my back like this even once. My coworker noticed how upset I was and he gave me a pat on the back. He said his wife cheated on him 2 years ago, and since then he's met a new woman who hasn't wronged him even once. It really helped to hear that at the moment, but I didn't want to apply it to my situation yet. He suggested I file for divorce right away. I couldn't. I had to confront her first. Maybe I would the next day, but I just wanted to see what she had to say. I scrolled through the messages, some getting incredibly sexual or flirtatious. The first, "I love you," I saw was a knife through the heart. That's what made me decide to file for divorce. When I got home, I waited for my wife to walk through the front door. My coworker actually came over for the first time that night to be my support. As soon as my wife entered, she saw us sitting in the living room. I introduced her to him and said he is my witness and support while I go through this time in my life. She was really confused and asked what I meant by that. I asked her how her playdate went. I'm sure her heart stopped at this moment. She looked like she saw the Grim Reaper and then she fainted. When she came to, she was laying on the couch. I asked her again how her playdate went and she covered her face. She started wailing and crying. I told her I didn't have time for all this and wanted an answer. She just said she couldn't. I went and got my packed stuff with the help of my coworker and we loaded up his car and mine. She was freaking out the whole time, begging me to forgive her and let her prove to me she would never do this again. I told her I married her with the promise of her being faithful. Now that I knew she wasn't, why would I stick around? My coworker nodded in agreement as he helped me. I followed him to his house and stayed there while I looked for a new place to live. Unfortunately, my wife's mom owned the apartment we lived in and she didn't like me very much. Speaking of my MIL, my wife begged me not to tell her what she'd done because then she certainly wouldn't be allowed to live there anymore. I told her I wouldn't but she still found out. When MIL found out we were divorcing, she grilled her daughter for so long that she admitted to what she did. MIL was so disgusted and disappointed in her that she kicked her out and told her if she was going to be a slut, she could do it to earn a roof over her head. My wife continued doing Uber Eats but started sleeping in her car at night, showering at truck stops, and using lots of Febreze on her clothes and car seats. Her AP already had a roommate and absolutely refused to let anyone else move in with them. If he genuinely loved her, you'd think AP would find them a new place to live or something, but 6 months later, my ex was still living in her car. She gained a lot of weight from all the fast food, so that alone was karma. Then she met someone else and started sleeping there sometimes, but she messaged me often. Some days she was really upset at herself and claimed she missed me, but other days she was bitter and mean towards me for dumping her and leaving her without a dime. Sometimes I replied, but I never let her on or really cared about what she told me. All I wanted to do was distance myself from her. I'm really glad we didn't conceive children at this point because that would have been much more complicated. Gotta look at the bright side and focus on how happy you can be to have another chance at selecting a better mate. I found a house for sale through my coworker and I have him over for dinner and vice versa all the time. We became best friends in this process. Wow, Opie, I'm glad you had a coworker there with you who'd been through something similar and had good advice. I'm also glad your MIL backed up the fact your ex messed up by kicking her out. Your ex was not considering anyone but herself when she decided to start an affair with her friend. There are too many people in the world to break your spouse's heart just so you can offer yourself to someone else. They don't have to be with anyone who's in a relationship. Anyone can find someone new if they look in the right place. If anything was wrong in the relationship, it's the unhappy person's responsibility to communicate what the problem is. If they aren't sure what the problem is, they should start by telling their spouse that there is an unknown problem and describe how they feel at certain times. It can be something two people work together to diagnose and solve, but only if both are willing and mature enough to do it. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. To cut a long backstory short, my wife 30, and I 31, have been living separated for about 1.5 years, married for 7 years. 1 year of the separation was in the same house because of our 3 children currently living with me, but the new agreement will be 3 and 4 days in alternation with each of us parents. Before the separation, there was a marriage crisis, also some bad bedroom problems, which we tried to solve with professional help, but at that time, she probably already did not want any more. Before the new arrangement, we saw each other regularly and also talked. Now she has recently remembered that as a child she had a very traumatic experience, which was probably triggered during the marriage crisis. There are also parallels to what happened. She will discuss this and other unprocessed with a psychologist and has already made an appointment. Since she moved out, she has already had several affairs because for her the marriage only exists on paper now. She is also more or less looking for something new, but is also still unclear about what she wants at all. Before the childhood trauma came out, I was actually ready to inform myself about divorce law steps because I realized there was no hope. But since I know about that trauma, I am not really sure anymore. Somehow I have the hope that through the psychological talks that are pending, she can process all the problems and pain from the time before me, and also what happened in the crisis, and then possibly imagine coming back. I know the chance of this is extremely small, and it would probably be healthier for me to just make the cut, but somehow I can no longer let her go so easily because of the new knowledge. Her understandable reason why she doesn't want to try it again is the lack of trust and the fear that it will fall back into the old pattern after a certain time. I'm pretty messed up emotionally, and also scared of the decisions I'll probably have to make and accept. I think I need someone with a neutral point of view. If anyone has any tips on how I can change my mindset to stop seeing hope, I would also appreciate it. Update. Some time has passed since my last post. Small recap. My wife moved out a while ago, and in the meanwhile met and had sexual contact with other men. Due to new findings, childhood trauma, for which she now wants to go to therapy, not sure if she is actually doing it. I was not sure whether I should have hope or not. I have since tried to keep the contact to a minimum and only discuss things that concern the children. This has worked more or less well, although we still had a lot of contact, especially because of the upcoming birthday of one of our children. I felt better, but of course, still had many bad thoughts about what she does or doesn't do in regard to men. During the last conversation, she assured me that she would not meet any other men anymore, because she didn't want to, and she had to find out what she really wanted first. I was sure that she did it anyway, but had no proof. Then was the birthday of my child. We were together with the family. She was of course also present. For me, it was super weird. I felt really uncomfortable as she puts on happy life and spoke like a friend to me while everything was broken. I also felt that something was weird. The kid's birthday party was planned for the day after. I called her in the morning and told her I thought it would be better if she didn't come. The kids were with me that day anyway. I explained why, but she insisted on coming. The party was going well, the kids had fun, and all. But I couldn't resist, and then it happened. I couldn't stand it. I checked her cell phone and read the 1 or 2 men, and that they were also coming to her house and spending the night. I must say that I mentioned several times that I didn't want my children to sleep in the same bed where she was doing things with men. She agreed with me and said she didn't want that either. In an angry reaction, I told her to leave the party. When she asked why, I told her that I had read her messages. After that, it escalated a bit. She was angry because I had disregarded her privacy. I did not care. I told her how could she be so dishonest, and that she should leave. I told her that I never wanted to see her again. She tried to justify herself with sentences like, I tried not to see him again, but I'm only human and weak. It got a bit ugly in the conversation, but then she left. Later, I got a message where she admitted to sleeping with men, and that she would continue to meet with the one. She said she didn't give a crap about me now, and she didn't care about my feelings anymore. She talked about how great the sex was, and that she has orgasms. She literally wrote that. She also wanted to report me for violating her privacy. She thinks I hacked her phone or installed some software, but I still had a fingerprint registered, and said I provoked her. For me, this was the final straw. I now have an appointment with the lawyer, and will file for divorce. But what hurts me so much is the sentence about sex. I realized that she wrote that out of anger to hurt me, but it still knocked my confidence. Our sex life was always okay, but nothing special. I was her first, and she was always rather reserved to discover her own sexual passion, and had also mentioned earlier that she liked her experience. I am also afraid that now it will come to an ugly divorce, and it will be more of a rose war. Also regarding the children, and the fact that they will eventually see their mother with another man. I had a conversation yesterday with my daughter, close to 10 years old, who doesn't want to be with her mother because she feels uncomfortable there. She was sad because she wants her mother to move back in. I tried to explain to her why that was not going to happen. I told her that it had nothing to do with the children, that mom still loved her, and that I loved her more than anything, and would always be there for her. I am not sure how much I can tell my daughter. Something like she is dating other men, I think is rather wrong to say. I am also really scared about the future, and how I will feel. Update. I wanted to limit personal contact to an absolute minimum and only what is necessary because of the children, and started to follow through. A couple of weeks ago, I had planned a ski weekend with my kids. Just before we left, one of my kids started making a scene because they didn't want to clean up the room. This led to discussions, and to the point that child said they didn't want to go with me and wanted to stay with their mother. So I told the child to call the mother and clarify that. Of course, it wasn't an option because of work and who knows what else. I was very emotionally charged at this time because I was really looking forward to the weekend, and so were the kids, and because I still blame my STBX for the shattered situation and how my kids feel. I had talked several times with said child about how it felt, and of course, they're doing really bad with it, quite the opposite of what the mother thinks, that must have no effect on the children. Anyway, I then took the phone, because I wanted a confirmation of what is now the matter. It got a little out of hand again, because I expressed to my STBX what I thought about it, and why it happened. She hung up on me, and I sent her a one-line email with the words, "You can hang up, but that doesn't change the truth." The whole thing was like before an emotional act on my side. Meanwhile, I managed better when I let the situation cool down first, and then react, see later. This in turn triggered a very long answer from her, also definitely emotionally written, in which she described her truths. I will not elaborate here, but it was about what I did wrong, and how I treated her wrong. Also, she said that she didn't regret the affairs, one of them led to an abortion. How can you not regret that? So again, completely trying to shift the blame and responsibility onto me. Also, and this is the critical point, she wrote, "The truth is that I don't want you in my life anymore, and I am ready to divorce you." I took the opportunity to respond to her bullshit, and present things objectively, to show her what kind of bubble she's living in. And I took the opportunity to point out to her that she was going to get a letter from my lawyer soon anyway about the divorce. I explained to her in detail, and objectively why I have no more hope for us. And then came the answer, "I did not intend to divorce, but apparently you have planned and organized everything." I did not care, and I did not go further into it by replying. The fact is that she is screaming for a divorce with all her behavior, and the things she has said. Maybe not in the illusory world that she has built up. Because according to her ideas, we would probably stay married, and be a family with everything that belongs to it. But she may continue to see other men. This has shown me that she is absolutely not aware of what she has done, and has not reckoned with the consequences. Presumably, she must have been shocked by my information. Since then, our contact has been almost exclusively related to the children. I have set up an app with a shared calendar, through which we can communicate about child-related things. On Friday 2 weeks ago, came the expected reaction. She wrote a text message that she had received the letter, and would read everything very carefully. I could literally feel her anger. She then made a few comments about the content, which showed me that she was very emotionally charged. She probably thought at the beginning that I was just making an empty threat, and now she has seen that this is not the case. As mentioned before, I also think that she is slowly realizing that her house of cards and wishful thinking is collapsing, and she has to bear the consequences herself. 3 days after she received the letter, she wrote me the following message. I will translate it roughly. Dear OP, I have been longing to apologize to you for everything that happened, that you had to suffer because of me, and that I hurt you, and that everything is destroyed. But I also want to thank you for the fact that I was able to grow up with you. I hope you know that I will always be there for you when you need me, and I mean it. Since we didn't make it as a couple, I would be very happy if we could be good parents for the children, function harmoniously, and give them security. I hope I have expressed myself clearly. Thank you. What should I even think about this? What is she apologizing for? For everything. Of course, that makes it easy to not have to reflect properly. So she doesn't have to deal with what she did, and still hopes for forgiveness from me. She is always there for me. That was part of our vows, and obviously she didn't stick to it. Thanking me for growing up. Again, obviously she hasn't learned the most important lesson, how to handle crisis. And by that I mean the initial marriage crisis that probably triggered this, and after which she ended up in a continuous downward spiral. She clearly wants absolution from me. I don't think she is waiting for an answer from me. I think it's more that she has now said the things she wanted to say, and thinks she can now feel better about it. She also said at one point that she would now start to try to see things more positively. Basically what I had said to her for years, and now she's doing it after she already destroyed her family. I now have 1 week to decide, so there's no emotional reaction. Whether I should give her the satisfaction, or take it away from her with an answer. Namely to hold the truth before her eyes, and the things I above. I know, NC and all. But in this case, I don't think she is looking for contact, but rather absolution. And my answer would be then only to smash her desire, and possibly now inner peace, which I assume by the vague wording of this SMS and action itself. Oh, and the report of the abuse of privacy. She has at some point claimed that she was at the police, but she would not report me. Of course not, probably she was told that she has nothing in hand, and would only make a fool of herself. The divorce itself is initiated, but it takes between 6 to 12 months, until the whole thing is through. What do you think, should I answer, or rather not? It's not about wanting to save the marriage somehow. I don't see any hope for it. Also, I would not want it at all, with my wife as she was before maybe, but she has changed so much for the worse, and is now no longer the same. Update. A week ago I had written, and now I need advice again. I am struggling hard, and am just hurt and angry. Against my deepest desire for revenge, I have not responded to the message of Maestags last week, because of the advice here. But the whole thing just won't let me go. I am sure she is living her life right now, and is happy. Finally out of the marriage, I filed for divorce, which she probably wanted for a long time. She probably even has a new relationship already. I think that because of the following, I got my oldest child a cell phone with which the kids can call me when I'm out of the house, and whatnot. It is also the number of the mother, because otherwise, the kids use the home phone, which is much too expensive. Now it happened that my eldest has tried to call the mother who is not picked up. Maestags then later sent a text message to the kid's phone asking who the number belongs to. At 10 p.m., the cell phone was called with a suppressed number, 3 minutes later from the mother. So since I don't think my ex knows how to suppress the number, she was not alone. In addition, I contacted her Saturday through the co-parenting app, because she had forgotten to do something kids-related. The answer was that she could only do it on Sunday. So she was definitely away for the weekend, probably with her new guy. What I want to get at, I really want and see, but it seems that there is always some information coming to me that gives reason for speculation. And I absolutely cannot handle the fact that my ex is already happily in a relationship. She has no right to it in my opinion, while the kids and I suffer, just simply because she apologized, which probably wasn't even meant seriously, and then just started building a new life in her way. This is killing me, and I don't know how to deal with it. I don't want this to constantly haunt me and make me feel bad, because I'm triggered everywhere. I'm probably additionally so angry, because I know that as a divorced male with 3 kids, it's virtually impossible to meet a woman. I know because I tried, even though I don't think I ain't ready. I also tried without stating that I have kids, which worked better, but sure that won't lead to a real relationship. Of course she has no problem finding someone as a good-looking and naive young mother, you are certainly an easy target, or fetish of some. I doubt that most of them want something serious, but just take advantage of it. But if you are so ignorant and naive not to see that, you are happy in the moment, right? And I do not wish that for her, even though I know that this definitely suggests a bad character trait of mine. How do you deal with it? How do I change my mindset and stop caring about her? Why do I love and hate her at the same time? OP, sorry to be blunt, but your wife is a cake eater. She wants the stability from you with the children to support her lifestyle. She is the same person who said sex was better to belittle you. This is her way of justifying to herself that she is a better person, so don't respond, and you show her you are a man of your word, and go ahead with the divorce. Don't communicate with her anymore. Only through your lawyer or a court-approved co-parenting app. The truth has already been stated. She told you she didn't regret her affairs. It seems your children need some therapy as the reaction of your child suggests he is still struggling to come to terms. So focus all your energy on yourself and the child. They have seen their parents argue and heard things that children their age probably don't need to hear, so there may be some trauma that needs to be addressed, so reassure them through therapy. Good luck, as it's a long hard road when children are involved. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on today's story. If there is a story you would like to share with me, please feel free to contact me. Today I'm going to tell you guys how I, 32, wasn't good enough for my wife, 36. I still don't know why, and it still bothers me today. We were married for 9 years when my wife went from a happy, outgoing, communicative woman to a completely shut down and gloomy individual. She mentioned that she was having trouble finding purpose in life. She really enjoyed fitness and working out, so she did work at a gym as a trainer for a while, but suddenly quit after one of her students insulted her and said she didn't know what was good for them. She didn't want to work for a large corporation and couldn't find any shops to work at. Before I knew it, she stopped taking care of herself. She didn't want to exercise and started overindulging in edible treats she would normally limit herself with. But then, just as quickly as it happened, it started to reverse. My wife didn't tell me anything different other than she was starting to feel better. I thought that was great, and asked her what caused her mind to change. At first, she said she didn't know, but then she said she started to realize that animals live their life, even without knowing their purpose, so she could do the same. That seemed fine to me. Around the same time, she adopted 2 cats. She started exercising again to take off the 10 pounds she gained, and she started doing her hair and makeup each day, even though she wasn't going anywhere that I knew of. I made sure to compliment her and offer her encouragement. I brought home cat toys and treats along with flowers for her. I did everything I could to support her and be her husband. It wasn't enough. One night I brought work papers home to work on, and the next day I forgot to bring them back to the office. So I returned home 3 hours after I went to work. There was an awfully nice car parked in our driveway. My heart started racing instantly. I didn't recognize it, so I knew someone was visiting my wife. I parked behind this mystery car to block them in and ran into the garage. I closed the sliding garage door to slow down anyone trying to escape. I really was thinking about the worst-case scenario. After I entered the house, I made sure the front and back door were locked too. I went downstairs to our gaming basement, as we called it. As I came down the stairs, I saw them scrambling to stop doing what they were doing. One of them was my wife, and the other was a man I saw once before. I saw him at my wife's cousin's funeral a month ago, right before my wife's outlook on life changed for the better. Was this guy blood related to my wife? I didn't know. They were both naked. AP grabbed his clothes and dove behind a stack of boxes to get dressed. My wife wrapped a blanket around her, sat on the couch, and face planted into a pillow to scream. I asked loudly what the hell was happening right now, and my wife just asked me what I was doing back home. I asked if that was really important when I just found her screwing another man, and quickly followed up by asking who the hell he was. She said he was Alan, but we'll just call him AP. They met at the funeral we went to, and they weren't going to have sex. They were just going to make out for some innocent fun. I was so offended and disgusted with her at this moment. Why did she think that was even okay? Why did she want to do this, and did she take me for a fool? It was obvious to me they were having sex when I came down the steps, and I was sure this wasn't the first time he was in her house. I decided to bluff. I told her I installed discreet security cameras outside her house 4 months ago, so I was going to know if this wasn't the first time he was here. I shouted to AP, who was still hiding, and asked him if he'd been to my house before this. He was extremely nervous when he replied, telling me he didn't want any trouble and would prefer to stay out of it. I screamed that he was involved with my wife, so apparently he couldn't stay out of it. I asked him again if he was in my house before, and he said he would tell me whatever I wanted to know if I came with him outside to his car. My wife screamed for him not to tell him anything, which was the first admission that she wasn't telling me the truth. I looked at her with fury in my eyes. I couldn't help it. I'm so glad I didn't completely snap and go crazy or anything. I agreed to AP's terms and went with him outside. He couldn't have been older than 24, so he was at least 12 years younger than my wife. On the way out, I locked my wife in the basement. I had to shut the door really quickly because of how close she was to following us and protesting. I didn't want her to interrupt us at all. When we got outside, AP was very discouraged to see that his car was blocked in. I told him to start spilling the beans. He hesitated, of course. He probably didn't want me to savagely attack him, but he was outside now and could see his car, which gave him renewed hope that I would let him leave. He said they started seeing each other the day after the funeral. Every day I was at work, he came over to see her. He said at first it didn't go beyond just being friends and playing video games, but then my wife started coming on to him. She would ask him how she looked and stuff like that until they finally ended up doing it. I couldn't help it. I started crying. I asked him why. He said he only ever had a sexual relationship once before, so it was hard for him not to give in. He knew she was married and knew who I was, but he was excited she liked him. I said that was enough explanation. I thanked him for telling me the truth like a man. I moved my car so he could leave. Before he left, though, I told him never to speak to this woman again, even if she said we were divorced. I told him she wasn't good for anybody and he could find a better woman than her. He agreed. Just after he left, my wife's sister pulled up like she was responding to a fire. She tried to get out of the car before it was in the park and had to shove it into the park with her leg hanging out. She jumped out and started screaming at me that I locked her sister in the basement. I told her yes, I did because I had to talk to her lover without her screaming at us. She stopped dead in her tracks and asked, "Lover?" To which I replied, yes, she had a lover in her house while I was at work. Since I had time to talk with him alone, he told me they'd been sleeping together for weeks before I found them today. She was speechless. Just then, her phone started ringing. It was my wife. She asked me if we could go get her, and I said yes. We went in, unlocked it, and she barged in looking like a wild animal. When she stopped screaming, she realized her sister was much calmer than she expected. Her sister asked her if she was cheating on me, and my wife just rolled her eyes and asked if we were serious. Her sister told her to stop playing dumb and be honest because it is not okay for her to be cheating on me. My wife was speechless and annoyed. She finally said they didn't have sex. I let her know that AP told me everything before he left. She just stood there, looking like an idiot with her mouth hanging open. I told her I saw him on top of her, doing the motion, and I didn't need her admission. I just wanted a divorce. She did a double take and asked me why like she didn't already know. Her sister went upstairs to start packing her stuff. My wife's face was pale and her makeup was smeared by the time her sister persuaded her to get in her car and stay at her for a while. She could not believe her life was changing and she was caught. I could tell she never really considered the possibility or consequences of me catching her in the act. It's a shame if she put any thought into her actions, she might have realized she wasn't ready to move or divorce me. Why wasn't my support and presence enough in her life? I showered her with love, but she only thrived with the attention of another man. I told her these things when she wouldn't stop calling me. She said she couldn't live without me and she didn't think hanging out with this guy would lead to having sex. I told her I didn't believe a word she said because she had a man over in her house while I was at work. I added that her behavior switched so quickly once she met this guy, so I knew she was sleeping with him and relishing the attention. Her sister caught her having sex with a completely different guy in her own bed. That was obviously insulting and upsetting enough that she kicked out my wife. By this time, our divorce was final and I got to keep my house. 9 years ago, I had my wife sign a prenup in my favor and since I was paying for the house and she didn't think we were going to get divorced, she signed it. I don't know where my ex is now. I haven't heard anything about her and I'm extremely glad we never had children. I've since started dating a new woman and we've been together for 1 year. I'm taking it slow and only have my girlfriend sleep over for short lengths of time. To be ready for a new marriage means you're perfectly capable of standing on your own 2 feet and don't depend on another person to function. I know that sounds odd because it's joined together in marriage, but that's the best way to ensure your marriage will be successful. Wow, OP. I am so sorry your wife didn't appreciate your attempts to connect and emotionally bond with her. From hearing your story, I assumed that your wife got it in her head that she deserved more than just one man to shower her with adoration. It seems to me that she started having some kind of mental crisis about herself and the only thing that helped was an outsider's flattery opinion about her. The problem that causes this is when a partner starts to see their spouse as less meaningful to them than other people. It might be because they start to focus on their spouse's faults, they become bored with routine, and marriage has provided them the comfort required to wonder if they deserve better. Of course, this is nothing more than a person's ego inflating. They too have faults. Faults that their partner accepts and works around. No one is more worthy than another for love and attention. We all deserve an equal chance to find unconditional love, which means having a spouse that doesn't decide to betray you for anything. Stay humble and stay committed, everyone. Thank you for sharing your story, OP. Now let's get into today's second story. The marriage to my wife, 30, was all fun and games until I, 31, needed her to compromise with me. When we got married at 24 and 25 years old, I was extremely well off already. I'd been working at my father's company since I was 18 and had several raises over that time and savings built up. My wife was able to get her nails and hair done whenever she wanted. I bought her a nice car and made sure it was always safe and legal. She didn't have anything to worry about and she got everything she wanted. She was a good wife to me and never acted suspiciously or unhappy. The only thing I expected of her was to be there and have dinner ready when I got home from work. It all changed when my dad began struggling to pay medical bills for my mom. I told him I was more than willing to help, but it meant I had to tell my wife to cut back on her spending. I asked her to spend less than $200 a month on pointless things. Of course, I didn't say it was pointless spending. I called it fun money. She was appalled. She didn't know how to spend as little as $200. I told her this sacrifice was for my mom, but that didn't seem to justify it for her. 1 month later, while I was doing her expenses, I calculated that she spent $821 over what we could afford. When I confronted her about it, she blew up on me. She said she couldn't possibly stop buying the things she needed to survive. When I asked her what she was talking about, she named a haircut, nail fillings, a new purse, Bath and Body Works, new clothes, and new shoes. I could tell she really believed she needed these things. I was starting to realize I married a heartless, materialistic woman. I told her this couldn't happen again. My dad and mom needed our financial help for a while, and it wasn't asking very much of her. She still didn't like it, but she said she would try harder. The next month, while I reviewed our purchases, I found she got gas in a town 2 hours away. This shocked me. I had no idea she even left town. I decided it was much better not to bring it up with her. Instead, I got a GPS tracker and put it on her car. I was going to accumulate proof that she was using my money to see someone behind my back. Surprisingly, that month her spending decreased from $821 over to only $305 over. Still bad, but she tried. I told her she was doing better, but I needed her to cut back even more. She wasn't as upset as she was the first time, which actually raised a red flag for me. Was she spending someone else's money? 1 month later, I had a record of all the trips my wife made while I was at work. There was a lot of shopping in a town that was 2.5 hours away. It didn't make sense because her spending was way down, only $168 total. What was happening? That's when I discovered she made trips to a specific neighborhood address 2.5 hours away. She visited this address in places near it on 10 days out of the month. On 5 other days, she went shopping in our area but didn't spend any money. How was that possible? I knew at this point she had to be seeing someone else. Someone that provided her money. My wife was pretty simple-minded and her password for everything was the same for years. I finally caved in and got into her phone while she slept. I found a secret messaging app which involved text conversation with someone programmed as lover. How disturbing. My heart was pounding as I read their conversation, which started 2.5 months ago, around the same exact time I told her she needed to cut back on her spending. She complained to this person that she was being cheated on but didn't want to go through a divorce until she got revenge. So she lied to this man and he gladly volunteered to sleep with her. He was a lonely older man who had money to spare because he was a lawyer. She found her perfect target. They sent each other pictures of very private areas and she thanked him for treating her to things. In response to that, he thanked her for the sex. I can't tell you how mad I was. I never felt this level of betrayal. I woke her up and demanded she leave the house. She was shocked and offended, but all I had to do was throw her phone outside and she followed it. I locked all the doors and threw her car keys out the window. I shouted that she was lucky I even let her take the car because I bought it. She was crying and making excuses. I told her I saw everything she said to her lover, noticed the change in her spending habits, and had her GPS location throughout the month. She had the nerve to be upset with me. She screamed outside my house for an hour before she finally got in her car and drove away. The GPS showed she went to AP's house. I filed for divorce, and before it was even finalized, AP told her he didn't want her to live with him. He wasn't ready for a serious relationship. He just wanted to have some fun. I knew this because my wife confided in our pastor when she was homeless and begging the church for money. He was confused because as far as he knew, we were still married. While begging for money, she asked him to pray for her. I think she needs more than prayer. Word got around in our church and a single lady approached me and asked me on a date. Shortly after that, the divorce was final and my wife only got to keep her car. Everything else was mine due to the proof I had against her. My mom managed to recover from her health issues and my income went back to normal in less than a year. That was the best part out of all of this. I made sure to tell my ex that she left me because she was materialistic and impatient. I hope my story encourages everyone to be hopeful in the face of betrayal. Life goes on even if it doesn't involve that person anymore. Also, don't fall for any materialistic girls because they have a lot of growing up to do. OP, I am so sorry your wife didn't have the patience or consideration for you or your mom to cut back on her spending. There are people who have no choice but to live off of $1,000 in a month, yet there she was, complaining she had to give up her fake nails for a short time. It's hard to know if someone is choosing to be with you because of something other than who you are. I wish your wife would have put some thought and empathy into her actions. She didn't think of anyone but herself when she chose to find someone else's money to spend. Being materialistic is a shame and it only makes someone crave more and more. Find the true meaning and purpose in life instead of burying yourself in crap and wasting your time and money. I'm glad you came out on top in the divorce and she wasn't able to destroy you any more than she already did. I'm also relieved that your mom is doing better now. Thank you for sharing your story. I wish you the best of luck in life. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. I'm 40 male and my wife, 32 female, had just moved into a new neighborhood and we didn't know anybody there. Thankfully, through our children, we were able to meet some cool couples that we could hang out with. One of those couples, let's call them Larry and Pam, was especially cool to us. We had a lot of the same interests and they lived this sort of jet-setting lifestyle even though they had kids. It was something that my wife and I thought was impossible before we met them. The four of us hit it off and we spent a lot of time together. It helped that our children were close too. It worked out very well when we wanted to go out and have double dates. We could travel and we had them to talk to about things going on with our kids. After a few months of knowing them, I started to notice that Larry was a little flirty. I joked about it one time when he was flirting with my wife, just telling him to back off because she's taken. Pam shrugged her shoulders and assured me that he was just a flirt and didn't mean anything by it. I was confident in my relationship and I wasn't worried about a little flirting. I've always been under the impression that it was harmless as long as it didn't evolve into anything else. But the flirting continued. It happened often enough that I was starting to get a little uncomfortable with it. My wife was gorgeous. This isn't saying that Pam wasn't, but Larry would have been crazy not to want my wife, but I wasn't sure if he was respecting our boundaries. Pam and Larry sent their kids to a summer camp every year and they were able to convince my wife and I to send our kids to the same one. The idea behind it was if the kids were all away for 2 weeks, we could take a grown-up vacation without them. It honestly sounded great. My wife and I were looking forward to going away with them. We thought that it would be a great opportunity to take time for ourselves and almost have a second honeymoon of sorts. In the weeks leading up to our departure, my wife had been growing a little bit distant. I kind of chalked it up to thinking that she was going to miss our kids while we were gone. 2 weeks away from them was more than we'd ever spend apart and I knew it would be hard for her. But I noticed that she was making secret phone calls and texting people very privately. I was a little curious about what was happening. The day of the departure came and we joined Pam and Larry at a vacation rental we all went on together. It was right on the beach, there was a jacuzzi tub on the porch, there was a large smoker grill, and we had high-end luxurious accommodations. It was heavenly. The first night that we were there, we bought some beer and wine and we all sat outside after I manned the grill and got the little trunk. I noticed that my wife and Larry were once again very flirty. I was in high spirits, so I once again laughed it off. I went to bed, and when I woke up the next morning my wife was not there. When I got up and moved around the house, I saw that she was out by the water in her bathing suit and going for a swim. That would have been fine had Larry not been there with her. He was shirtless in his swimming trunks standing very close to her. He was clearly looking her over in her bathing suit, and my wife made no effort to divert his gaze. Right away I walked out and joined them. They both welcomed me as if nothing was going on, which made me feel a little better. I still didn't like Larry ogling my wife, so I practically dragged him back to the house. Later that night all of us went out dancing. Again we had some drinks and we were getting tipsy. On the dance floor, I noticed that Larry was gravitating toward my wife. At this point I was moving past the laughing it off phase. He was constantly around my wife and it was rubbing me the wrong way. What was even more infuriating about it was that my wife was letting it happen. He would go over to her and put his hands on her waist and she would lean into him. Did she think it was me? Was she that drunk? I waited until the following morning to ask my wife about it. She laughed it off and told me that I had nothing to worry about. She apparently didn't even remember dancing with Larry. On the third and final day of our vacation, shit hit the fan. We were supposed to stay at the vacation rental for 6 days, but I ended up having to leave early because I walked in on Larry with my wife. We had gone the entire day without any issues aside from me catching glimpses of Larry looking at my wife in her bikini. I was happy with what my wife had told me and I wasn't going to worry about it. But of course, as soon as you let your guard down you realize that you were right all alone. We wanted to throw some stuff on the grill, so I was out back doing that. Pam was with me and helping to skewer some chicken and vegetables. I hadn't even noticed that my wife and Larry were missing. I ran inside to grab some more meat from the fridge and I heard some shuffling from the laundry room. I paused and listened carefully to what it was. I could hear what was clearly two people trying to be quiet while having sex. I opened the door right away and saw my wife pinned against the wall with Larry in front of her. They were in the middle of having sex. They were so into it that they almost didn't even notice me walking in. Moments after I opened the door, Pam walked inside to grab some more vegetables and saw them too. She screamed at Larry and he jumped backward, dropping my wife on the ground. Both of them looked at us like deer in headlights. They never thought we would catch them. I just walked away and went to pack my bags to leave. My wife chased me up to the room and tried to beg me not to leave and to forgive her. She said that he meant nothing. He had just been there at the right time. I had absolutely nothing to say to that. Was the laundry room the right time? It didn't make any sense and I was done with it. I told her to get away from me and she did. I noticed that her phone was on the nightstand in the bedroom charging, so I went through it just to see how long it had been going on. It had been going on for weeks from what I could tell. It seems like she and Larry had been messaging each other about how excited they would be to go to the beach house. Larry told my wife that he was more excited to see her in a bathing suit than anything else. At first my wife replied saying that it was inappropriate, but he then pursued it more. She ended up confessing to him that she had thought he was attractive and she didn't mind a little secrecy in her life. They met up once before we all went to the beach house and had sex in our kitchen. I found Pam and I told her about everything I learned through my wife's phone, and she was just as hurt as I was. She and I ended up leaving the beach house together and going back home. The entire drive back we were talking about how angry we were and how we wanted to ruin their lives. They didn't get to cheat on us and just be happy after. When I got married, my mother encouraged me to get a prenuptial agreement. I wasn't the wealthiest person in the world, but I had received an inheritance before I met my wife and I had a comfortable nest egg. On top of that, I had a good job that paid me well and gave me good benefits. It was enough so my wife didn't have to work. Our agreement clearly stated that if we were to divorce, she would be given a percentage of my assets, with the exception of if we divorced due to her infidelity or her betrayal of our marital vows. Because she cheated, I could leave her without fear of losing a penny. That was the best thing that I could think of to get her where it hurt. She didn't come home until the following day, which made me question if she was just taking advantage of the time she had with Larry. I told her about how we would be getting divorced and how I wanted her out of the house, and she swore that I couldn't do that to her. She told me that she would have rights and that in our divorce she was entitled to half of everything. It almost seemed like she wanted that all along. I questioned if she ever loved me to begin with. I reminded her about our prenuptial agreement, and I watched the indignation in her eyes fade as she realized she was going to be completely screwed. Pam and I both ended up divorcing our spouses. I didn't have to pay a cent to my wife, and I ended up selling the house. Now I'm just trying to pick up the pieces that were left behind in all the mess. I know that there are still some good people out there, but I just have to find them. OP, I can't believe you had to go through all of that. It's heartbreaking to find out that your partner is cheating on you, and it's so much worse when it's with a friend. You were definitely right to be suspicious about Larry's flirting with her. For anyone to blatantly flirt with a married woman in front of their wife, they clearly don't have any respect for boundaries. The fact that they were stupid enough to continue their affair while all of you guys were at the house is honestly baffling. It doesn't even seem like they were trying to hide what they were doing. I'm glad you were able to come out on top in the divorce. It definitely sounds like she was banking on being favored by the courts. Your mother was smart when she convinced you to sign the prenup. I can't help but wonder if she saw something in your wife that you didn't. I hope that you can move past this and find new partners that will treat you guys properly. I wish you the best. Now let's move on to our next story. My wife and I met 8 years ago in a bar. She was attractive and single, and so was I. We hit it off, and after that we pursued a relationship together. She gave me some of the best years of my life. I started a family with her, and I really thought that we were going to grow together. Unfortunately, I found out that she was having an affair with her boss. Because of that we divorced. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to experience, and I just want to find a way to move on from it. But here's the story anyway. We had just bought a house and we were undergoing a lot of stress with remodeling and moving. On top of that, both my wife and I were working a lot in our respective careers to try to make our way up the ladder. I work as a copywriter and she is a journalist. She was very close with her boss and all the other employees at the paper she worked for. I know that she saw her boss as sort of a mentor for her when she started. He helped her master writing in her field, and he often gave her special stories to cover that fit her interests. I knew the man well also. He was a widower, and my wife had a lot of sympathy for him because she was worried about him being alone all the time. His children had moved out of the house and he lived by himself. At first I thought that the relationship was harmless. Years had gone by and he was more of a father figure to her than anything else. Finding out that he was the person that she had been having an affair with was beyond shocking. I started to notice that things were off when she was spending more time in the office. Her job is easily one that she doesn't even have to go in for. She has a home office that she can work from whenever she wants to, but she chooses to go in because it helps her focus and she enjoys socializing with her coworkers. When she told me that she would have to be staying late, I questioned why she wouldn't just come home and work in the office. Certainly, that was better than staying in an office building by herself. She could have had dinner with her family and then went right to work. Having it happen one time would have been something to forget about, but when she was staying late in the office 2 or 3 times a week, I had some red flags waving. Normally I wouldn't assume that she was cheating on me, but I had read a lot of Reddit posts and confessions from people who were being cheated on. I started to worry if maybe that was the case here. I honestly didn't even know where to begin with trying to find out if she was cheating on me. I decided that the best thing to do would be just to observe some of her habits and behaviors and see if everything was all in my head. The more I watched her, the more I realized there might have been something going on. Another thing that I noticed was how she would tilt her phone away from me when she looked at it. It was odd, that wasn't something she had ever done before that I was aware of. If she wasn't trying to hide anything, I didn't understand why she would tilt it. I was starting to work myself up thinking that she was having an affair, so I decided to take the plunge and hire someone who could dig around. I found a local private investigator who took on the case. After I told him everything I was suspicious about, he decided that the best place to start would be at her work. He waited outside around the end of her workday to see if he could follow her and see where she was going. On the second day that he was working, I got a text message from my wife telling me that she would be staying late in the office. I immediately told the private investigator about that so they would keep a close eye on her building to see where she went if she left. However, she didn't leave the office. When she eventually did, the private investigator followed her to our house. It seemed like she really was staying late at the office. I told the private investigator that I was clearly in the wrong for what I was doing and I wanted to call them off. They ended up convincing me that there still could have been something going on in the office. I thought it was silly, but I told them that I would pay for another day just to rule that out, and then, if they didn't find anything, I would terminate our contract. Sadly, they found something. My wife was yet again staying late in the office, and the private investigator found her in her boss's office, performing oral sex on him. He got some pictures and videos of it for me. When he showed me, I was shocked and disturbed, and I felt like the world was falling out from under my feet. I had my suspicions, but I never wanted to confirm them. Part of me had been hoping that hiring the private investigator would just prove that my wife was faithful. Her boss was like a father figure to her, so I couldn't comprehend how they even started an affair. Regardless of my confusion, I was done with her. I had given her everything I possibly could, and she was throwing it back in my face. I felt a lot of pity for myself, but after wallowing in that for a while, I was angry. I wanted to show them that they couldn't both just treat me the way they did without there being consequences. There was a rival newspaper in the area that I remembered my wife always talking about. Her paper and the other were always trying to one-up each other. I had the perfect story for them. Before I sent an article to the rival magazine, I met with the HR manager of the newspaper my wife worked at. I told them about everything that happened and how they were having sex in the office, showing them the evidence. It was a clear violation of their policy, and they assured me that they would both be dealt with. 2 days after I did that, my wife came home in tears, complaining about how she was fired. She didn't tell me what happened. She lied and said that she was laid off due to budget cuts. I was partially surprised that she continued with the lie, but at the same time she had already lied so much. When I knew that she was fired, I sent an email to the newspaper. I got a response saying that they were going to cover the story, but they needed to put a spin on it to make it more marketable. Otherwise, it would have just looked like revenge porn. The story that they ran with was about a boss sleeping with his worker and getting them both fired. They put the picture I attached in, though they blurred the faces of my wife and her boss. Because my wife worked for the rival paper, we never had that one at home. However, that morning I made a special stop to go and grab the latest issue of the newspaper. I sat right at the kitchen table and opened it up in front of her while I drank my coffee. Right on the back of the paper was the article with a picture of her in her boss's office, performing sexual acts on him. She nearly spit out her coffee when she saw it. She yanked it out of my hand and read the article while I sat there with my arms crossed in front of me. She didn't say anything, probably because she didn't think I realized what was on the paper. As she was reading it, I commented on how funny it was that the article mentioned a boss and an employee getting fired the very same day that she was. That clued her into my knowledge about her affair. She tried to explain herself and told me that it was a one-time thing, but I didn't believe her. She was mad that I had the article published. It's hindsight. I do feel like I went a little too far with that. We lived in a small town and everybody saw that article. It wouldn't have taken a lot of brainpower to figure out who it was. We ended up getting a divorce. We had a prenup, so thankfully I didn't know her anything. We sold the house and split everything down the middle. It's just hard to believe that something like this would happen to me. I've been loyal and trustworthy throughout our entire marriage, and I never expected that. I know it's going to take a lot to move on from, but I'm hoping I can heal soon. OP, I'm so sorry you had to go through something like that. It's difficult to admit to yourself that there is the possibility your partner is cheating, but you do need to trust your gut in some situations. You definitely did the right thing by hiring a private investigator to do digging for you when you didn't know how. From the way it sounds, their affair had been going on for quite some time. It's curious to think about how they started their affair when their relationship was very clearly almost father-daughter-like. It's always so interesting to me when people have affairs in the office they work in and don't expect anybody to ever catch them. In my opinion, that's just karma coming and getting back at you. I hope you're able to heal from this and you won't let this hold you back in future relationships. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. My wife, 49 female, and I, 53 male, were married for 30 years. We have 3 adult children, 2 of which are married with children of their own. Our kids hosted a 30th anniversary party for us, and as a present to my wife, I decided to get her wedding band engraved. For a few years, our marriage had simmered down. We still dutifully worked our careers, and I thought we were both tired at the end of the day. My wife never asked me for anything or tried to talk to me about what else she needed. She claimed to be perfectly content and happy with our way of life at this point. Our kids were out of the house, but they came over all the time. I knew we weren't ready to retire. My wife was a popular and well-respected woman in town. She worked in the hospital as a speech therapist. I was also pretty popular, but only because I was good at making my wife's friends laugh. I was a natural comic and did a whole bit for them about my wife being the breadwinner. She started to look at me like I was a joke she didn't understand. Our intimacy levels dropped to a kiss each morning and night. I was pretty sure that whenever we did have sex, my wife had to think of a fantasy to make it more entertaining. I did ask her if she was satisfied with our love life, or if she wanted to change something. She said there was nothing we could change, then corrected herself to, there's nothing we should change. She said I was the man for the job. So, life went on as normal, but I wanted to see what my wife was up to at home. She always had one random weekday off. I installed 2 security cameras. One in the high corner of our front porch, and the other in the high corner of our living room, blending in with my prized hunting trophy. I was disappointed that my wife's engraved wedding band still hadn't returned in the mail 3 weeks after our anniversary party. I asked my wife if she ever got a small package in the mail, reminding her that we were still waiting for her ring. Her expression told me she'd completely forgotten about it. That made me very upset. She said she hadn't gotten a package yet. I was at work the day after that, when I checked the camera footage for the past few weeks to see if the package was stolen off our porch. It didn't take me long to find the clip of the mailman, 9 days earlier, holding a small package with the rest of our mail. He walked up to the door, grinning ear to ear, and knocked. My wife answered and pulled him in, excitedly. On the next camera, I watched them make out and undress like fighting cats, unashamed to be all over each other in my house. Clothes were strewn all over the place, and in the commotion, the small package slid under the couch. I watched the mailman take my wife to the living room. My wife of 30 years was having an affair with the mailman. I found 3 more clips of her sleeping with him, each on the days she had off, and I didn't. I figured the affair had been going on since before I installed cameras. Our whole life together, our children, house, careers, all seemed like an illusion. All the time I spent loving and living with my wife was for nothing. She couldn't deny another man, not even after decades spent by my side. It made me feel like our life together wasn't enough for her. Having a committed, loyal husband, 3 successful children, and 4 beautiful grandchildren wasn't enough for her. She had to sleep with another man. For what? What could he offer her that I hadn't already? The fleeting excitement of something new. When it was over, the living room looked exactly as it did before, except for the small package under the couch. The first thing I did was take the video clips to the post office. I showed the head honcho and filled out a report. He'd assured me that AP would lose his job for this. Then I went home. I walked past my grinning wife, straight to the couch, reached under, and pulled out the small package. She was surprised and confused that I knew exactly where it was. I pointed to the security camera. She looked, but it took her a few seconds to find it. When she did, she was mortified. Her breathing became deep and rapid, and she looked at me like a scared rabbit. I asked her if there was something else she wanted to confess to, now that she knew about the camera. She stuttered and just started saying no repeatedly, slowly shaking her head. I was staring at her like I already knew, so she broke down crying and sat on the couch, the exact spot she cheated on me. I screamed at her, essentially asking why she felt like cheating on me and why she actually went through with it. Her excuse was that it was normal for people to fall out of touch, but we didn't have to get divorced because I could do the same thing. I asked her if she even knew what marriage meant. Then I asked her if she remembered her vows. Her head dropped. I told her to pack her bags, because I wasn't living with a cheating, smelly rodent. Her jaw dropped and she asked me if I was serious. She couldn't believe I was throwing away 30 years of marriage. I told her she was the one that threw it away. I was just acknowledging it was trash. She started ugly crying. I ignored her for a while and started packing her stuff, but she crawled over to me, trying to touch me. I told her to stop acting like a baby and own up to her actions. She broke her vows to me, so our contract was null and void. I didn't have to live with her, and since she was the offender, she needed to get out. Well, she called the kids over for support. That was her mistake, because they sided with me and started packing up all her stuff. She couldn't believe it. Her kids and I packed her up and moved her out of the house. She went to stay with our eldest, becoming their full-time nanny in exchange for food and shelter. My son humiliated her by saying she wasn't allowed to have any lovers or strange men in the house, and on nights she got permission to go out. Her curfew was 9 p.m. AP was also humiliated. Like my wife, he was well known around town and the truth bomb spread fast. The footage was leaked online after I provided it to the post office. He was fired and became a laughingstock. What moron sleeps with a guy's wife in their house, while on the job, in perfect view of security cameras? My wife stayed with our son and his family for 8 months before she had enough to get her own place, but it wasn't meant to last. She tried asking our kids for help until she could pay them back, but they denied her, saying she raised them never to lend out money to anyone. My ex bitterly moved back in with our oldest, resuming her position as full-time nanny for the foreseeable future. I've been on a few dates with a nice woman, but I decided to try focusing on enjoying myself and who I am. The kids also take me out for pop nights. I'm rebuilding a lot of things about myself that I had smothered, trying to make my ex happier. OP, I am so sorry your wife of 30 years started an affair with the mailman. It's true that people change and grow over time, but this can be and should be something that brings two people closer. Admire their uniqueness, qualities, and point of view. There's no one exactly like them, and nobody knows every trial and hardship that person has faced. Their way of thinking could be incomprehensible to their spouse, but they can do their best to understand and stay open-minded. Appreciation for another life, especially that of the spouse you love, knows no limit. When a person gets married, they are promising to resist temptations that lack in comparison to the love they have for their spouse. Love isn't always a feeling, but it is a choice. When you aren't feeling the love you used to for your spouse, choose to love them by remaining loyal and honest. Talk to them about how you feel, even if it hurts, and even if it means separating. Cheating is never the answer, and as a person with appreciation for another life, it should never be an option. You handled this exceptionally well, and I thank you for sharing your story. Now let's get into our second story for today. My ex, 23 female, and I, 27 male, had our honeymoon in Hawaii. My family was well off, while hers wasn't. That didn't matter to me, and even though my parents warned me to watch out for this girl, I didn't. She seemed very genuine and sweet. While dating, she always wanted to see me, even if it was as simple as a walk in the park. She hung on to my every word and asked me really smart and observant questions. I was studying to be a lawyer, so I was very busy with schoolwork and reading. For that reason, much of the time we spent together was in silence, her laying on my lap while I worked. I took her on a few classy dates, went to dinner and a show, an upscale restaurant, and horseback riding. She was really wooed by the date on horseback, because I already had the trail memorized in my head. I admit I was showing off a bit. That's when she met my parents, and they warned me about her. I don't know how, but it's like they saw right through her genuinely interested charade. They told me she just wanted the money I promised. She didn't actually know me or what I liked, she only talked about herself and what she wanted. I admitted she was light-hearted and didn't take much seriously, but I thought that's what made us a good match. She could help balance me out and encourage me to have fun. Sometimes when we'd talk on the phone, she would mention other men in her class and I'd just roll my eyes. I wondered if she did this to make me jealous, or if she was trying to see how possessive I was of her. I had a serious conversation with her around 2.5 years of dating. I asked her if she knew how serious I was about her, and if she felt the same. She said yes, and swore I was the only one she wanted to love. I could tell she wanted to say for the rest of her life, but she stopped because she didn't want to spoil any proposal. Around our third anniversary, I graduated and regretfully proposed. During the wedding planning, and even on our honeymoon, she was very selfish. As we tanned on the beach, she actually had the nerve to say she was bored and missed her friends. I had a wonderful time in Hawaii, swimming with dolphins, snorkeling, bar hopping, club dancing, and having amazing sex with my new wife. This was like a celebration of life for me. I was finally done with school and married the woman I saw a future with. We were on a tour of the island when all the magic and excitement I had for the future disappeared. The tour concluded, and I was gazing at the view when I noticed my wife wasn't standing by my side. It took me 10 minutes to find her making out with the tour guide in a secluded, overgrown area. I yelled her name in disbelief, asking what the heck she was doing. She pulled away from the kiss, shocked I found them, but not guilty or remorseful. She was smirking and put her hands up, saying I caught them. The tour guide apologized and quickly left my death stare. I told her this was exactly what I was afraid of, that she didn't understand how serious and long-term marriage is. She said something like, "Come on, it's not that big of a deal, it was just a short make-out session for being a great tour guide." She didn't think it should affect me or our marriage at all. I told her she couldn't be more wrong. I left her there yelling after me. I hailed a cab and went to the touring office. I filed a report with the tour guide's name on it and caused so much of a scene that the manager came out and promised me he'd be fired. I walked back to the hotel for all my stuff and called to cancel her credit cards. Leaving her on the island without money was the only way to get through to her. Without doing this, I don't think she ever would have realized how bad it was to make out with someone else on her honeymoon. She only called me once before I got on the plane. When I turned off airplane mode, I had 78 missed calls and 10 voicemails. She was in shock that I left her there, and then she was scared when she realized her credit cards didn't work. We hadn't even added her name to my bank account yet, but I had enough of her information to cancel her credit cards. In the first voicemail she left, she said that she didn't know what she did to deserve this. As it turns out, this wasn't the first time she made out with someone while she was with me. She only made out with the tour guide because he did an excellent job and deserved a unique tip. A few voicemails later, she said how sorry she was and promised me that now she understood the severity of kissing another person. It still sounded like she was trying to convince herself how serious it was. What she really wanted was to convince me to come back for her, or at least buy her a plane ticket home and forget all about this. She said she still wanted to be my wife and hoped I would forgive her like a good husband would. I never responded to any of this. I was a lawyer, and I refused to play her games. I filed for divorce as soon as I landed. She stopped calling me, and I eventually found out she was at her parents' house. I heard through the grapevine that she expected a warm welcome and consolation from them after being stranded in Hawaii, but they only scolded her for losing a good husband so quickly. Her parents were ashamed by her selfish actions and weren't afraid to tell her how bad she messed up. Her friends also tried giving her a dose of reality by refusing to trust her. No one invited her to group outings because they were afraid she'd start making out with their boyfriend. She still complains and started leaving her parents in the middle of the night to hang out with strangers. She posts ridiculous videos online of her drinking too much, making out with people, and having a good time, as she puts it. OP from her behavior, it seems your wife's only goal is to do whatever she wants and use people. She didn't have money or personal goals, so she did her best to seem like a worthy match for you. I am relieved that you caught her and didn't waste any time trying to patch things up. That usually doesn't work out anyway, especially when there's infidelity so early on in the relationship. Not even a honeymoon in Hawaii was enough for this girl, and if she's ever going to happiness in life, she needs to take a chill pill. The world doesn't revolve around you, and you can't sail through life by using people. Don't let this woman discourage you from meeting a wiser, more honorable woman when the time is right. Focus on growing as a person, and let people you meet earn your trust. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.